Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed your lunches. Glad to see everyone back now. It's my pleasure to introduce Julia COLYAR. Julia is a senior policy analyst at the Council of Ontario Universities. She's a senior, prior to working at the COU, she was a faculty member in the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy at the University of Buffalo. I've had the pleasure to know Julia a little bit this last year, working around issues of the COU and the Call for Ontario Online, and it's a real pleasure to work with her, and I'm really glad that she could make it here today. So, Julia, please come up. Thank you.
Which button is it? Just the arrow? Is that right? It's the arrow button. Thank you. Well, good afternoon. I think the after lunch spot is a little rough, but I'm sure you're all going to be mesmerized by this topic. I'm really happy to be here today to talk about this project, and I really want to thank Richard and Emmanuel for inviting me here. It's already been a really great learning experience, and I know there's much more that I have to learn. As Richard said, I'm at the Council of Ontario Universities, and I should start by saying who we are. COU is a member organization, and we represent the 20 different publicly funded universities in Ontario. And our purpose is to facilitate communication, to provide a little bit of infrastructure, to enable collaboration sometimes, and to help shape advocacy efforts. Both to the provincial government and also to the public. In the context of the Ontario Online Initiative, our role has been sort of, again, to provide a little bit of infrastructure and organization, to help bring information from the ministry about funding guidelines and opportunities to universities, but also to take information from university members and bring it back to the government to say, hey, don't you think that we should be doing this? We're more or less successful, I think, in that way. So you can see that we're situated outside of universities and outside of the provincial government, and that's the perspective from which I'll be talking today. I've been working in higher education for a number of years, as Richard said, as a faculty member, before that as an advisor and a researcher and an administrator. And in all of that time, I had very little experience with online education. I've never taken an online course. And in fact, as a faculty member, thinking about online was really scary and not something that I or my department felt was a real priority, even though it's been emerging for quite some time. I had probably even less experience thinking about collaboration. I remember as an assistant professor in my first few days, I got this advice: keep your head down, close your door, get your research done. So this might be really good advice for a faculty member, but it's not great advice to inspire collaboration. What I did bring to COU, despite these gaps in my background and experience, was an interest in post-secondary institutions and their contexts, policies that shape the work of universities and faculty, and thinking a lot about student experiences. And I've learned a great deal in my time at COU. So I want to talk today about some of these things that I have learned and about our initiative in particular. I'll start with a little bit of background about the Ontario context, talk about approaches to online in the last few years leading up to this current initiative, and then spend some time thinking about this new consortium, which is being called, at least for now, Ontario Online. And if you hang around our offices enough, you will hear different phrases being used to describe this new thing. I guess that's just the way it is. I also want to confess that I was telling my good colleague Nancy Walton earlier that I was feeling a lot of anxiety about this presentation in the last several weeks, because what I was wanting to do was come here and say, this is our consortium. This is this great new thing. But in fact, we don't even have a consortium yet. We're working toward it. It's a work in progress. But I'm mindful of, and I'm increasingly mindful because of conversations from earlier today, that a consortium is always going to be an evolving thing. We will probably always be working towards some kind of progress. And I think that it's our job to take good, careful, thoughtful steps. And I'm sure that you have good advice for me today, so I will appreciate that. So a little bit about our context first. Oh, I can look there. Just quickly, so in Ontario we have 20 universities that are publicly funded, 24 colleges. That's about 450,000 undergraduates and about 60,000 graduate students in Ontario, and then another 220 college students. So it's a pretty big group of students. Colleges and universities were established with very different missions and mandates. And at the time, there was not a goal of having students move from one sector to the other. They were different animals. In many ways, they still are. Both have grown tremendously in the last number of years, and there has been this kind of mission creep. So there are some colleges that offer bachelor's degrees, applied bachelor's degrees, and universities increasingly think about internships and co-ops and the kinds of experiences that lead to sort of direct prepare for work kinds of programs. In the summer of 2012, the Ontario Ministry of Training Colleges and Universities, that's MTCU, there's going to be a lot of acronyms, so I apologize, MTCU, they initiated a process for the development of strategic mandate agreements, which are SMAs. These are bilateral agreements negotiated between each university and college and the government, and they are intended to support MTCU's interest in differentiation. So each university and college set out to describe themselves to the government, including things like program strengths, areas for growth. Each of the agreements includes a section addressing the same sections. So sections like teaching and learning, research, fiscal sustainability, that kind of thing. And each of these different sections, teaching and learning, research, et cetera, they each have a set of metrics in them that universities will have to use in order to sort of measure their progress. You're sensing my hesitation because it's still unclear how these SMAs are going to be used in the world. We know they're going to be used for things like program growth or program development, new programs, perhaps. And they will be used for the allocation of graduate spaces, maybe other things. The ministry's goal for these documents is to help support student access and success, to build on university strengths, to avoid duplications, and to maintain an efficient and financially stable post-secondary sector. So if we know who has strengths where, then funding can be directed in particular ways. Now, in many ways, Ontario's context is already differentiated. There are colleges and universities quite different. There are also different kinds of universities. There are larger universities and smaller universities. There are francophone institutions. We have an art and design university. We have a technology-focused institution. So there's already a great deal of diversity across the province, but the government is looking for something a little different. There's also a lot of overlap across universities, of course, but the SMAs and this differentiation agenda ask universities to commit to particular kinds of goals and areas of growth. This process has taken more than a year, and it's caused my own hesitation and also the anxiety of lots of people maybe in this room. Because we don't know exactly how the SMAs are going to be used, and in particular, if they'll be used to make funding decisions for universities. And any kind of concern around funding, as you know, is magnified in lots of interesting ways. I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about this framework because it is the backdrop upon which online and this new initiative sort of emerges, and it's not neutral. And because while the principles make good sense in many ways, they don't always agree with the efforts of the online space. And so the result is that it's very complicated. Another important element in the Ontario context, and maybe your context as well, is this issue of graduate outcomes. I don't think there's a day that goes by that we don't see something in the paper about university graduates getting jobs at Starbucks and the ways that the labor market doesn't match the kinds of graduates that universities produce. So this focus at times to me seems quite instrumental, but this is a narrative that is present. It's one that we have to figure out how to disrupt. Universities are then working to define themselves, to articulate graduate outcomes, maybe worry about future funding decisions. And on the horizon, we see a flattening of enrollment. So we've been in a period of growth for a number of years. Now we're going to see that flattening off, and maybe even we're going to see it decline. So one way to think about this, I think, is that universities are competing for a shrinking pool of students. In fact, universities may be competing for students with colleges and universities, especially as students and families are worried about what their graduates are going to do in the labor market. And families and students may be looking for applied programs that lead to a specific kind of career path. And of course, if with declining students or declining enrollments comes declining tuition. So this is kind of a big deal. I'll put it that way. To make things even more complicated, I know you're wondering, could it get more complicated? Yes, it can. We had a recent election in Ontario, and we now have a majority government, and that gives a lot of us some confidence about stability over the next, say, 4 years. But one of the signals we get from the ministry is that we're in a time of fiscal restraint. So they're not going to be listening when we come to them every year and say, we really would like some more funding. They're going to be saying to us, actually, no. Think about the ways that you can use the funding that you already have, or maybe a little bit less. So I hope that I've made clear that taken together, these contextual factors point to a couple of themes. One is the question of competition. Universities in Ontario compete for students. Universities sometimes compete with colleges for students, and in so doing, they compete for funding. The second is collaboration. Actually, it's more like the promise of collaboration, because the SMA process is intended to provoke a kind of collaboration in a systemic way, so that parts are fitting together in a way that seems harmonious, at least to the ministry. And universities need to be thinking about the ways that they might specialize to fit in to this new integrated system. But these two themes are definitely at odds, and we're kind of in a space of what I've been calling collaboratition, which is an uneasy mix, I'm not sure how you'll translate it, between collaboration and competition. And it's awkward to say. You can try it, collaboratition. It's as awkward to say as it is to be in terms of our experiences. It's a time of tension. It's a time of opportunities. I think there's a lot of work to be done. So into this context comes a new initiative in online education, but it's certainly not new. For years now, online opportunities have been around in Ontario. Distance education has been around a long time. Once it was called correspondence courses or programs. They've been around for probably a generation or longer, and they've evolved into very robust online programs. Both the colleges and the university have invested a significant amount of their resources into online development in separate ways. There are lots of continuing education efforts across the province. There are currently more than 3,000 online courses available at Ontario universities, almost 200,000 course registrations, and about 133 fully online programs, mostly at the undergraduate level. There are also a number of online partnerships developing and/or are well established. For example, the Ryerson York Exchange, which is an online platform hosting about 40 courses that are eligible for transfer across York and Ryerson. It's also worth mentioning that the college sector in Ontario has a very robust consortium of its own called Ontario Learn, which facilitates transfer opportunities for students. And I'm sure there are other partnerships that I don't know anything about yet. The development of online is also very uneven. So some universities have invested a lot of resources and have incredible programs, and some universities are just getting started. So the playing field is quite different. Evenness isn't even part of the conversation right now. Universities in Ontario started thinking about a consortium approach, just with universities, about 2 years ago. And this was the Ontario Universities Online. And this idea came out of a provincial speech, a speech at the provincial level, when we had an idea that the ministry might provide some direction. And so the goals of this Ontario Universities Online were to support collaboration in the development and delivery of technology-enabled learning. So to start with this consortium, 7 universities got together. There were some working groups. Many of the conversations focused on how will the budget be figured out? What's the cost and revenue model? Probably every conversation. The one that started with quality standards ended up with how's the money going to go? We worked on a vision statement. We thought about a business case. We talked about an implementation plan and how it might unfold. We looked at other models across Canada and internationally to find some best practices. We looked at BC campus. We looked at what was happening in Manitoba, all over Australia and England, etc. And we had a lot of good conversations. And just as we were sort of thinking, okay, what's the next step? Then the ministry came in and said, here's some funding. And the conversations around the OUO completely stopped. And we said, aha, funding. Funding has its own inspiration. And this new initiative from the ministry provided commitment for 3 years. And we are in the middle of that 3 years right now. So I wanted to provide all this background for you because the current online initiative hasn't just appeared in this nice empty vacuum. We are trying to build a consortium in a landscape populated with all kinds of online things, both that are happening at our own universities and all over the globe. There are MOOCs, I guess there are also SPOCs. I never heard of that until today. I think that's the right word. There are private online developers and providers. There are online programs that are being run by universities in the US, but delivered to students in Ontario. And as I noted earlier, the online initiative, which is in some way about coming together, aims toward collaboration at a time when universities are also being pressed for differentiation. So universities are being asked to do a couple of different things at once. I don't mean to say that we're unique in Ontario and that our problems are really special and we can't do it because it's just harder for us. That's not my intent. I think that part of our transformation is to get a hold of this history, and I think we need to think about changing the way we talk about our landscape, highlighting different things about our landscape, and we're working on that. But I'm mindful that as I talk today, I'm reifying some of the things in the narrative that I think we need to disrupt. Our own history makes it sound like we can't move forward. That's a challenge. So at COU, we have been wondering, how can universities use this ministry funding and support in productive ways? Given this context, given the previous investments, given the strengths that are already there, how do we move forward? How can universities work collaboratively, in collaborative practice, so that we are able to make gains in efficiency, which we need to do probably, and make gains in student access, and maybe most importantly, how do we work toward excellence? So that brings me to the current initiative, which is now called Ontario Online. As I noted, the ministry started with a 3-year commitment to fund an online project. The goals were both immediate and tangible, and also sort of forward-thinking, intangible, very ambitious. And I don't think I'm talking out of turn when I tell you that some of the things that universities think are really ambitious, the ministry thinks are really simple, like the low-hanging fruit. So there's some miscommunication to be thought through. The ministry's goals in this initiative include leveraging existing online strengths and developing new opportunities, improving institutional productivity and the efficient use of resources. So you're hearing some of the funding issues, sustainability concerns coming through. But then also providing high-quality online learning opportunities for students and enhancing student access and mobility across the province. I think universities would also add to this, saying that an initiative like this is about using technology and online tools to enhance student learning, that a consortium is not an end in itself, it's a vehicle to get somewhere. It's a tool to be used to improve and enhance student learning opportunities. In doing all of this, the ministry seeks to enhance the national and international profile of Ontario in this world of online education. And that's a very ambitious and future-oriented goal, I think. I think what underlies all of these goals, one that's not directly stated, but I think is existing there, is this fact that if we're going to move forward, we have to move from this sort of collaboration, as I've been calling it, this uneasy state of collaboration and competition together, moving to something more productive in terms of our collaborative practice. And I think this is going to require a cultural change of the kind that David talked about with what we mean by open. It's a movement toward communities of practice, to collaborations that change the way we do business, not just in the cost and revenue models that we use to think about courses and who takes them, but in the ways that we think about universities and university work, about faculty and how faculty work is defined and redefined, thinking about faculty incentives as well. But to be totally honest, I don't know what it means to say that we have to do business differently, because business has looked the same for an awfully long time. So I think we're going to get there, but I think that's where the transformation also lies, in how we think about what we do. So back to this ministry funding. The ministry has provided funding the first year, so for fiscal 2013-2014, colleges and universities each got just a little bit over $4 million for the purpose of developing online courses. So in the university side, we developed about 67 new or newly redesigned online courses. These were mostly introductory in a variety of disciplines, sort of the foundational courses. These were chosen because the ministry wanted us to work toward scalability. So we would have introductory courses that might bring in thousands and thousands of students. It's important to note that these courses are not open. They weren't designed to be open, and for the foreseeable future, openness is not a goal. Openness in the way that David talked about it. You must be an Ontario student to enroll in one of these courses. And it's possible that you could enroll in a course and not have it transfer the way that you want it to your home institution. So if you're a student at Ryerson and you take an online course at University of Ottawa, you may or may not get credit for that, depending on the agreement between those two institutions. So that's pretty complicated. Funding was also made available at this time for the development of the Center of Excellence, which is now being called Ontario Online. This is sort of the consortium space. This is what we are thinking of as the consortium. This is going to provide some structure, a bit of organization, some kind of an actual center from which networks can stretch. So with the funding from the government from 2013-14, a steering committee got together, and they are currently working on getting this whole operation staffed. We'll have a board of directors eventually. Maybe next week it will be incorporated. Our fingers are crossed. The steering committee has included college and university representatives and other folks from around the sector that had an interest. And bringing those two sectors together in productive conversations has been an interesting challenge, but a good one, and I think they're making great steps. For fiscal 2014-2015, the ministry has set aside about the same amount of money for course development. Again, college and university pots of money are separate. And again, a little bit of money for this Ontario Online Centre. We are right now, literally, I think the guidelines may be in my email, we're finalizing the guidelines for new course proposals. And we hope that universities are going to develop a great variety of amazing plans. And I'll get to those proposals in another second here. The guidelines come from the ministry. The COU has developed sort of a clarifying document, and those two things taken together will help guide university proposals in the next handful of weeks. The ministry has developed a conceptual model, which is too small for you to read, really, but it's okay, I'm going to tell you all about it, to provide some guidance to colleges and universities in this whole initiative. So this is sort of the center of Ontario Online. There are 3 hubs of activities in this model. You'll see at the top there's the board of directors that we haven't yet figured out yet. And then there are these 3 hubs of activities. The course hub is where courses will be housed or listed or advertised. We're not quite sure yet. The ministry imagines that online courses will be transferable both within sectors and across. So you can see there's a little circle there for university courses and one for college courses, and there's a big giant orange arrow that makes it look like the transferability is simple because there's a big pathway. Not so, not yet, I should say. It's worth noting here that the ministry has in mind something very particular about shared courses. What they mean is that there will be an intro to psychology course that somebody develops, and it's going to be amazing and excellent. And all the students in the province of Ontario who need intro to psychology will take that course. So it'll have 5,000 students, let's say. That's what shared course means to the province. And maybe they think that it'd be great for the whole slate of first-year courses and maybe first and second-year courses, things that are foundational, maybe general education. These could be offered online, excellent courses, right? And students will just take all their courses online for their first 2 years. You can imagine that universities find this to be really confusing, and that's the nicest way to put it, probably. First of all, this is very concerning because universities rely on their tuition revenue from introductory courses, which are large sometimes, and that tuition revenue helps support other smaller courses and programs. So with the internal economies being so complicated, universities are not willing to go with this model of shared courses. The other problem with this is that the idea of bringing all students all together for their intro to psych courses and everything else, maybe in their first year, this to me works against the idea of differentiation in really important ways. You're saying, government is saying something like, it doesn't matter where you go. These are the courses. It does matter where you go, I think. So it's hard to figure out how to resolve this idea of shared courses and the differentiation framework. They're not completely antithetical, but they're enough antithetical to make me feel uncomfortable. Maybe you too. It's certainly confusing. So this course hub box, it's the biggest one in the model that the ministry has given us. It is certainly the one with the most concerns attached to it. The Knowledge Hub is another one of the boxes, and it's going to be a space for research activities. So there may be lots of interesting, of course there is, lots of interesting data that derives from online courses, maybe research about pedagogy. The ministry thinks, and we agree, that it'd be great to use some resources to gather information that can feed back into this new online center to improve courses and student experiences. Maybe just our understanding of student pathways would be helpful. And then finally, the Support Hub, which would gather technology supports, in an online environment for students. Maybe their academic supports like basic writing, or basic math or writing supports. And this is the space where they imagine that this portal is going to go. The portal would be a resource for students so they could go online, find a course they want to take, see how it will transfer, register for the course right there, and boom, they're in an online course. I want to mention that as I was typing up my notes about this, I kept, I'm not a good typist, I kept typing hug instead of hub. So, the support hug and the course hug, hug seems quite friendly. That seems optimistic, and so I'm going to stick to it. But these are the hubs for the ministry's model. The interesting thing about a conceptual model, at least for me, is that once you have seen it, you cannot unsee it. So as soon as the ministry put this into their guidelines last year, that became it. And I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but I am saying that it means that our work has been defined, maybe limited, in specific ways. That now we are working toward this thing because we can't unsee this model. I think it's a pretty good model. The things are there we like. But it's possible that a collaborative group of community members might have come together and put something else together as a model. We don't know. So that's where we are right now in Ontario. We're just at the beginning of this project. We're in the middle of funding for it. We're trying to keep the long view in mind. We're trying to remember that this is part of a good long story. We're working within limitations and possibilities. There are constraints, there are opportunities. The challenges to collaborative practice for us are many, and they're easy to see. Some of them came up earlier in the presentation. And we're trying to rest our weight on the opportunities, but you can see it's evident in my slide even, the constraints and the challenges, there are 3 of them in just the one bullet about moving forward. But you've heard about the challenges, so I'm not going to say those over again. I want to talk about how we're going to move forward. What's next for us? The first thing is that I want to emphasize that our moving forward, we think, has to be as a system. And that means that we're not just a set of universities. We are a system that has some kind of interdependence, maybe even in the way of our strategic mandate agreements a little bit, that we move together, that collaboration in a system is not just our goal, it's an assumption that we have as a starting point. It's pretty hard, I know. I think that transformation does need to occur in order for this to happen, to get out of the system of cooperation or collaboration. So here's what we're doing. I'm going to highlight just a few of the priorities as we go forward. The new funding guidelines that we're working toward now, there's a number of different things, but a couple of them I think are small steps toward getting to collaboration. So in the second round of course funding, which we're right now finalizing, the kinds of, the categories of funding are going to include online courses and online modules. And now I know that you're thinking to yourself, wow, that's really innovative. You'd say it sarcastically, because modules, they've been around a long time, but modules are not something that we're used to. Not in the way that, sort of as an open resource, right? We actually, in thinking with the ministry about COU, in thinking with the ministry about what might be included in these guidelines, we said modules, and the ministry said, what? And we said, yay, we've taught them something. So the modules are intended to, as you know, they're portable, they include academic content, and for our purposes, they would be made available to all publicly funded colleges and universities for use. This is where we are with how open things can be right now. This is the extent of openness for us. And it's actually a pretty big step. In talking with our colleagues around the province about this idea, we have had the range of opinions and feedback. Some people say, love it, let's start now, let's do it yesterday. And some people say, why? Who would use a module? Why would any faculty member grab somebody else's module? So that's where we are. I think, though, that this is where some good efficiencies can be found. I think that these are really small steps, and I think that we need to work on sort of bigger transformations. But we have to work with, within this context of university autonomy and faculty, what's the word, academic freedom, there it is. So we can't just take a step into an open course right now. We need something sort of to bridge our steps along the way. So we're going to start with modules. The second round of funding also includes a category of online courses that we're talking about as being low enrollment, upper level, or graduate level courses. The key here is now we want to focus on low enrollment courses, because we think that this can actually help with sustainability for niche programs or small programs. The idea here is that a program in, say, foreign language or philosophy or whatever else that might enroll a smaller number of students, if a couple of different universities worked together to create a course, build a course that each could include in their curriculum as an elective, as a requirement, that this would actually broaden the list of courses available to students at both of those universities, or maybe 3 or 4 or 20. This means that programs could include a larger suite of opportunities for students, and it leverages the experience of faculty at a couple of universities or more. So smaller programs could be more viable, sustainable, because faculty time and talent could be shared. So now we're talking about sharing differently, sharing faculty time and talent rather than sort of sharing courses, although I recognize that the overlap is there. This is not the kind of sharing the ministry has in mind, but we think it makes a lot of sense. We think there's a lot of promise in there that could transform programs in important ways. It's not exactly resonant with differentiation goals, but we think it would certainly work toward the goals of student access and excellence. As we work on these next steps, there are some opportunities we want to maximize. First, we're trying to recognize and celebrate the great collaborations that are already happening in our system, and there are many. Just as a couple of examples, ONCAT, which is the Ontario Council on Articulation and Transfer, which is sort of the credit transfer group, they are a member organization representing all of the colleges and universities, and they have been around for about 4 years, and they're doing amazing work in helping develop pathways and agreements across universities for student experiences, student mobility, student success. We also have a scholars portal, which on the university side is a consortium of universities to support scholarly materials made available to students in the province. We have an application center, which is a collaborative enterprise for universities. Colleges have their own. The application center is a space in which applications are collected and processed and then distributed to the various universities. So there are examples. Now, I know that these are outside the academic enterprise, but there are examples of collaboration that make sense and that have been very successful. Other kinds of collaborations that we're thinking about. One is our collaborations with the ministry. We have to be in good, productive conversations. We can't always be defensive. We can't always be reserved or suspicious. We tend to approach them with great caution, and I think we're working toward a partnership there. We have been working to help create collaborative conversations with colleges and with colleges sort of within colleges and, sorry, not colleges, colleagues, university colleagues, between campuses and across campuses. We've tried to engage colleagues from the sector in order to get our guidelines together to figure out what kind of courses to be funded. We know that these are experts, they are experienced, they know an awful lot about universities that we don't know, so we need their help, and we need to make sure that they're helping each other. We think that there are creative ways to leverage resources on various campuses. So, for example, why not have somebody who's in media, an expert in media and technology, work with a campus that doesn't have as many resources? to develop modules or online courses to make a really robust and excellent online course. That's a kind of partnership that we haven't talked about in the past. I also think that there are partnerships within campuses that we should really work to capitalize on. So, for example, we're thinking in this new round of funding, what if different departments on one campus got together to create an online statistics course? Lots of programs require statistics. I bet on many university campuses there are 4 or 5 or 8 or 10 different statistics courses that are at the basic level. Maybe there could be one, maybe they could have some modules that they would insert specific to their disciplines. We think this makes a really good, makes good sense. We also want to continue our collaborative conversations with colleges because they are partners in this. You can tell from the conceptual framework. But heretofore, we've been working in parallel rather than trying to talk across. There are some excellent partnerships between universities and colleges right now, absolutely 100%. But we're not at the place where we're talking really openly about how courses might be developed in partnership and how students might move in meaningful ways. We think that there are opportunities in the Knowledge Hub and in the Support Hub. We're going to keep working on it. These are really tough conversations to have because of our collaboration. We think that there are lots of different ways that efficiencies can be accomplished. We are going back to the ministry to talk about money that can be spent over a couple of different fiscal years. Because one problem, maybe this is going to sound familiar to you, the academic year and the fiscal year do not correspond. So we are in the middle of fiscal year 2014-2015, and we're just going to get the money in a couple of months. So let's say funding for the current round of funding is going to arrive, well, to be optimistic, let's say December. The fiscal year is over in March. That's a couple of months to get things done. So that's a really big challenge. We need some way to have flexibility in how we can use funding resources from the ministry. And if we had that kind of flexibility, we could have multi-year projects that are ambitious, that can be cross-disciplinary. We can get learning communities together working toward open textbooks. Yours was a much faster process than a fiscal year. But we're going to need some time for the developments of resources for all kinds of classrooms, virtual and not. So, systemic change is going to be very difficult. That's my theme of my talk. I don't think it's quite like one step forward and 2 steps back, because that has a linear kind of feel to it. I think we're in like a very complicated waltz. And maybe it's going to be beautiful. But I do think that transformation is going to come, and I hope that it will, and I think that it will be through collaborative partnerships and collaborative enterprise. We have learned this from many of the programs that are already out there. Some of you are representing those programs today. And we see it in small ways with each of our difficult dance steps. So I thank you for the opportunity to talk about this. It is the thing that I've been thinking about endlessly for the last year or so. And it's nice to be able to say it out loud. And I'm happy to take advice and any sorts of questions. That's my contribution.
For your speech. My main question is about openness. Since the government is spending all of this money, I think it's about $42 million or something like that.
Yeah.
Why would it not have it open instead of having? Yeah. What is the benefit of having it not open? That's my question.
It's a great question. I'm not sure that I can talk about the sort of the downside of openness. I think the bigger question for us is whether we can convince faculty that this is a good idea. And I can tell you that probably the answer to that is we're going to have to do a lot of work around that, maybe in a number of years. The ministry, I mean, I agree with you that if it's public money, then openness seems like a reasonable request. It's all public money. These are all publicly funded universities. So I'm not sure that this funding is a whole lot different than funding that universities have received so far, and they haven't been asked to be open. The concern for us in terms of openness is really about faculty autonomy. Faculty need to be able to make that decision, and they may come to it in some time, but I think it will take a while to get there. Yeah, it's not a very satisfying answer, I know. Thank you for the question.
Hi, Julia.
Hi there.
I'm Patrick Lyons from
Yeah.
Carleton University. We've talked before.
Indeed.
I just have a quick question. There's a couple of things that you raised that I'm wondering, is it COU's perspective that Ontario is not ready for open educational resources in terms of the Ontario Online Initiative? Is it the ministry's perspective? I'm just trying to get a sense of the context where there might be resistance.
Yeah. I don't think it's the ministry's perspective. I don't think the ministry has a clear idea of what open really means. And so in that way, I don't think what I'm reflecting is their concern. I am reflecting what COU has heard from our members in terms of some resistance to open educational resources. It is for the folks that we have talked with, again, we have a range of responses. Some who say they must be open, they must be interoperable, they should work across every platform, and that's the only thing that makes sense. And we have folks who say, under no circumstances would I ever submit a proposal that would be open. So trying to develop consensus in there, I think is really difficult. The part where I think that's going to help us move forward is that funding gets attached to it, of course, right? And also that I think increasingly we're going to see that there are ways in which there are cost savings of all kinds for universities, but I'm sensitive to the fact that that's a long timeline to get to the point where faculty are recognizing that these are actually efficiencies and cost savings that make sense and can help keep universities sustainable, viable, excellent, all the rest. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think it also points to the challenge that COU faces in terms of straddling an interesting balance between the 20 different universities in Ontario,
Yes.
as well as what the ministry is looking for, right?
Yep.
I recognize that. And I'm always interested to see how COU can advocate for institutions in the ministry to get a balance for that, right?
Yeah.
So I do
Yeah.
appreciate that struggle.
Yeah, thank you. It's uneven, it's back to the unevenness across the system, yeah.
Matthew Brennan from Contact North.
Yes.
One of the things that surprises me, and it probably comes out in everyone of your size, is the seeming impossibility for creative destruction. The contrast with what we heard, for example, from BC Campus this morning, is that it seems to be to create some open space, you do have to go to creative destruction. If you're trying to work within all the confines of departments, of ministries, of faculty, of institutional interests, at some point you just get, all you can do is sigh and say, yeah, okay. But I'm curious to know, even within a context of the Council of Ontario Universities, because you're trying to keep a system approach, how can you imagine that the needed creative destruction to move the system forward in a context of a system that is so hidebound?
Yeah. That's my answer. I don't know. It's a major concern. Yeah, for sure. I appreciate it's a question, but it's really a comment, right? One that we certainly have been thinking about. Yeah.
Very interesting to see how all of these is layered, and to recognize that it's a flashback of a few decades for a lot of these issues. I'm curious about something. Those programs always have embedded in them a little bit of social engineering, and that their criteria will transform how universities, organizations, in this case university, works. Yeah. One of the criteria was for selecting the courses that would be funded was about sharing of credits. And universities were very, very good at responding to criterias, that says jump, and we say how high, and we try to jump higher than everybody else to be the selected one. And at the same time, we're very good at evolving with the criteria. I'm curious to see your perspective on how this transfer of credit will evolve. Already you mentioned York and Ryerson recognizing 40 courses. There's another consortium that 5 universities that have signed before even the call. Do you see that this call is moving universities towards more credit transfer, or is the inertia of losing enrollment in high enrollment courses, meaning high loss of revenue, is it an inertia that's too big?
Yes. I think that the threat of losing high enrollment courses or having students leave high enrollment courses at your institution for somewhere else, I think it's very real and it's a really big concern, and that may be the thing that keeps universities from accepting transfer credit arrangements down the road. I think that there's already momentum around credit transfer because of ONCAT's work, and I think that will continue and will evolve. But I do think that one of the most, not even one of the most, the most important thing that this new center has to do is figure out the variety of cost and revenue sharing models available. It won't be one, I don't think. I don't think we'll be able to say, oh, here's how we have money in our consortium. This is the arrangement that you have. I think we're going to have a variety of different models that universities are going to choose from in their own negotiations with partners in order to make that possible, to make it financially possible. So I don't, yeah, it's going to be hard. Thank you.
Just wondering, Julia, if there was any consideration for this entity being something other than, say, a legal entity. I'll just step back to my role at BC Campus. That organization was configured to be agile, so it was configured as a research project of a university rather than an entity. And that way it was able to push some boundaries, including such policy initiatives as, well, here is a funding program for the development of open resources. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to apply for it. Yeah. But that's the condition of the funding program. And so I wondered if any of those ideas had been kicked around and what kind of response there was.
Well, we didn't have that idea until I talked to you a few weeks ago, and then I went, what a good idea. Again, the idea of the sort of incorporation, the member organization, came on the heels of real success with ONCAT. And seeing how that group has worked has provided good motivation and foundation for another member organization. I agree that there are going to be some flexibility and agility problems, certainly, and of course we have this conceptual framework that's laid over top of it that's sort of telling us how to be. We didn't come across this as an idea, frankly.
Yeah, and I think it addresses one of the fundamental problems you raised as well, and that is being configured as a research project means that funding can be dispersed over multiple years as opposed to within a fiscal framework, which allows the kind of flexibility that faculty and staff need. So I just want to throw it out in case it's not too late.
Yeah. I think the paperwork for incorporation was submitted yesterday. Many thanks. It was fun.